Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm your host, Megan Henry, and I'm joined by Nick again. Hey Nick, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, see, it wasn't so bad the first time, and you actually, I'm gonna disclose that after the fact, you're like, anytime, I'll come back
It was
on.
fun. Can you believe it? It was fun.
It is fun. It's
Yeah,
totally fun to do these podcasts. And you get to know people. We get to know each other better. Because you're in Chicago and I'm in Philly, so it's a great medium to connect.
it is. It is. Looking forward to today too. Lenore sounds like an interesting person.
Yeah, so we're joined today by Lenore Chenard, and Lenore is a director of specialty claims at Hartford Steam Boiler, and I mean, honestly, I'm gonna. We came in with a plan of what we wanted to talk about, and we got a little off topic. All in good ways, all in good ways, and I do think you'll enjoy listening to what Lenore has to share because she has an amazing path to where she is now. Um, and I think many people can relate to just having the bob and weave and the winding path to where you're sitting right now, and what could be coming for you in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And with that, I have to add the little asterisk disclaimer to this that, of course, anything that Lenore is talking about is her own views, is not representative of Hartford Steam Boilers views. Just to put it out there, we're all lawyers here. We like to put disclaimers on things. But with that, we'll bring her in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Megan Henry.
Good morning, Lenore. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Megan. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you, and of course, as we always talk about on this podcast, we talk about things related to claims and all things claims. But as you and I and Nick were talking before we started recording, there's a lot of things I want to talk that have nothing to do about claims.
The
And
interesting stuff.
yes, the interesting stuff. Um, but I want to start with this. You are an attorney by trade, and like many of us, like Nick and I, at least I can speak for myself, I didn't ever intend to go to law school. I just ended up going to law school. What was your experience with your path to law school?
So, interestingly, I recently spoke at my son's second grade career day, and I had to come up with a way to make second graders understand what I do for a living. And I wound up taking a prop, which was the board to Candyland. And I explained to them that my career path has been sort of like the game of Candyland. Sometimes I've landed on squares and had to go back or lose a turn. But, so it really has been a long and winding road. I never intended to go to law school until I took a temporary job as a paralegal just to earn money to move across the country. I was about 20 years old at the time, and I immediately realized that the way that I think was conducive to a law degree. But at the time, I didn't have a bachelor's degree. So I really had to, sort of carve out it was a long road to get the degree because I was working full time and had to
Hmm.
find a way to get my bachelor's, and then never even thought about whether or not I'd get into law school. I
Hmm.
was just kind of, all right, here's my goal, and I went forth, and eventually I went to UConn Law.
Hmm. Well, and and you had mentioned though. Well, you'd mentioned. Well, actually, I should go back to this. So, were you working as a paralegal and going to undergrad at the same time?
Yes, so I after high school, I kind of bumbled around, and I wound up in upstate New York working at a hotel. And I loved what I did, but it was just not really, I was never going to make a good living doing that. And so I wound up coming back to Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. And I really wanted to move to New Mexico. So
Huh.
I took a temporary job as a paralegal, really for the sole purpose of earning enough money for the move. And it was the first day of that job, I read this deposition of a football, it was a football coach, and he was asked some questions about how far he was away from a pedestrian before he hit him. And his answer was kind of vague on his ability to, really kind of predict what the distance was. And I was like, wait a minute, this guy's a football coach. He's got to be able to predict like exactly how far it is or have
Yeah.
a pretty good idea. And I just knew right then, I was like, this is what I want to do. So I I scrapped my plans to go to New
He
Mexico.
should know
And
yards, right?
what was that?
Oh wait.
I said he should. Sorry,
Oh.
Megan. This is gonna probably be edited a little. My talking right here, but I keep getting glitches on my sound. And I don't know. We'll keep trying, but I
Yeah.
may have to exit out and get back in.
Okay.
So, let me ask, what drew you to New Mexico?
So that is another sort of random story, but it was actually when I was about 11 in 5th grade, we had this project to choose a state and we had to make like a diorama or I
I knew you were
actually
gonna
had
say
like,
diorama.
yeah, typical 5th grade stuff, right? And I remember, so I learned about the state of New Mexico, and the slogan was the land of enchantment. And I
Mhm.
really loved sort of the native history. And I just
Yeah.
fell in love with the state, had never been there, but it became my, since then I've been there many times, and to this day, it's still my favorite state in the United States.
Yeah. Um, but you had mentioned before we started recording too that you also are a singer. So where did that work into or weave into your path? Was that like just a side hobby passion, or was it something that you pursued like more seriously at some point? Or maybe you still do. I don't know.
So I grew up in a family of musicians, and initially I didn't really think that it was my thing because it was really my brother's thing. He played guitar. My dad was a bass player, so he played in bands. And at some point, I realized that I could sing and that my brother wasn't very good at singing. And I realized, oh, okay, I can, I actually have a role here. So from that point on, from the time I was very young, we always wrote and played songs and, first just for ourselves. But then when I moved back to Massachusetts, we started our first original rock band, and we released a couple of CDs back in the CD
Wow.
days.
Hmm.
And
So what was the name of the rock band? We have to ask.
The name of the band was Chainfall, one word, and there are still a few random YouTube videos out there if you
Oh,
search deep
wow.
enough. Um,
Cool.
and we had some great experiences with that band. We never made money, but it was really just just something that we loved doing. We tried to make money. We were unsuccessful, but we performed in Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York City, Montreal. So we just kind of, did that for a while, and then after that I had a bunch of different cover bands just for fun. And
Hmm.
so these days, I think the last time when my brother comes to visit, we'll just kind of jam on a few songs. These days we're more likely to play to our kids while they're
Hmm.
taking a bath or
Yeah,
something. But I
must
do
think
think,
that's cool. Your son must think that's really cool.
yeah, he varies. Sometimes he's like, "Mom, stop singing." So he keeps me humble. But
Yeah.
but I do intend at some point in my life to get back to doing it more regularly, but in this phase it's just not something I'm prioritizing.
Yeah, I mean, you only have time for so many things.
Exactly.
Well, and I have to point this out too because I see a number of marathon ribbons though too. So are you an avid marathoner?
I am an avid runner. I have only ran one full marathon, but I've done, a number of half marathons and a number of 10Ks. And here in Atlanta, we have the biggest 10K in the world every year on the 4th of July, the Peachtree Road Race.
Hmm.
So I do that every year. And this year I will be doing the half marathon in Hartford in
Yeah,
October.
that's great.
Oh,
So I
cool.
usually I'll choose one race, usually try to weave it into a vacation.
Hmm.
I've done Montana, I've done Albuquerque, Hartford, and there's a few more on my list, but again, it's something I do, to just for fitness and fun, but I don't
Yeah.
take it too seriously.
Have you ever done the Manchester Road Race?
I have not done the Manchester Road Race. That's Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, so it's probably hard if you're not um there. My sister lives in Manchester, so I've done it a few times, and it is a fun race.
I have heard of that one. One of my colleagues in Hartford used to run it every year. I have done the Iron Horse in Simsbury, um, but I haven't done the Manchester Road Race yet.
Yeah,
Maybe one of these days.
it's just a fun atmosphere though too, because it's Thanksgiving and people are like out on their front lawns, like cheering their whole families over, cheering everyone on during this road race. Nick, the Manchester Road Race I think is the largest. What is it? 5 miler. And it's a town in Connecticut. It's not a giant town, and it's just super fun race that runs through the town on Thanksgiving morning. So
It's a 5, so is that what, a 3K or
well,
whatever?
it's a 5 miler. So I don't know.
That's 3 kilometers, right?
Yeah.
Which that is sort of an odd distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, generally you'll have a 5K,
A
which is about
5K is
3
3
miles.
miles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
or about a 10K is about 6 miles. But then, yeah, you'll have these 10 miles, 5 miles, 50K, which I'll never do. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I used to
So
run.
let
Oh,
me
go
ask
ahead.
you this with your diverse background. We were kind of talking about it a little bit before we started the podcast, but so singing, where do you see a correlation with what you're doing now with your singing background or your practice in law? And then also marathons. I'd like to know how both of those, where you're like, I'm glad I have this
Life.
in my development, in my history.
So with singing, I think singing and performance really goes a lot to public speaking, and also leadership. I always remember my brother telling us, in that first band when I was about 20 or so, that when you're on stage, you're like 20 feet tall to the audience. So every minute movement that you make is magnified. Everything you say, everything you do, people are watching. So it's a responsibility to lead. And now, as a leader, I think about that a lot. I think about the behavior that I'm exhibiting and how I model that and how I want to lead. And of course, with parenting too. But I think and I've had good performances. I've had bad performances. I've performed to empty rooms. I've
Mm,
performed to larger crowds, and I think sort of having that ability to have to perform regardless, you have that, it's sort of that show up mentality, right? It's
Mhm.
like you're going to show up, you're going to deliver. However, how it's perceived is not necessarily within your control, but how you deliver it is arguably at
interesting.
least somewhat within your control, right? um,
Yeah.
and I
Kind
think
of like
with
oral argument in front of a judge,
Yeah.
right?
right, exactly. I mean, sometimes you might be making an argument and it's getting zero traction, and you have to pivot, because you recognize, you can sort of read the room and say, okay, the judge is not believing this, or it's not convincing him. So what else can I pull out? So it's a lot of that sort of, solving things or pivoting on the fly,
Yeah.
um when your sound goes out, or when you're um it's just you have to solve problems quickly, in a way that will, keep you moving forward. And I think with the marathon, I mean, that was a goal that I my goal was to finish, and I did. And it's one of those tools that I now have in my belt that I
Mhm.
feel like
Mhm.
anything I encounter, no matter how hard it is, I can always sort of, lean into that and say, you know what? I I I ran a marathon. I can do this. And
Yeah.
so I think
Right.
it's that overcoming hurdles or challenging yourself beyond what you thought was possible that, then on the days when you're really doubting yourself, you can sort of pull that out and say, "Hey, I did this. I'm going to remind myself of that right now when I'm feeling like I'm,
That's really cool.
yeah." So,
Yeah, that's really cool. So when you're singing, let me ask you this. When you're singing, at least when you first started, did you have to kind of, I think Beyonce says she pretends that she's something else. She has a different personality or something like that when she goes on stage.
Hmm.
Did you have to tap into something where it's you're playing a part almost to get yourself comfortable to perform?
so I would say, to an extent, yes, and to an extent, no. I think on the one hand, I think I felt pressured to do that. I felt like I needed to have a persona or dance in a certain way or, move in a certain way. And over time, I sort of accepted the fact that I am who I am and I'm there
Mhm.
to present who I am. And so, I don't tend to dance a lot when I sing because I'm really more about delivering the emotional content of the song. And it took me a while to be okay with that and to sort of recognize that, you know, it's like dancing doesn't come naturally to me. I mean, at this age, I don't care as much what people think of me, so I'll
Yeah,
still
me
do it,
neither.
regardless of how ridiculous
Yeah,
I might look. Um, but you can
yeah.
imagine, in your early 20s, that you have a much lower level of confidence and of
Mhm.
sort of, you know, being comfortable with yourself. So I think I tried unsuccessfully to you know portray a persona until I recognize that the who I am is just fine. you know
Yeah,
It takes
yeah,
people a
that
long time to get there though, and it's like something I I like talk to my daughter who's, she's 11, but I talk to her about that too, like, don't try to be someone different, and it's so hard to tell preteen this, but cuz the pressure to fit in is so high, but I'm like, who you are is who you are, and you should be proud of that and own it. You don't need to fit the mold of everybody else, cuz eventually being a little bit different is what you're going to want. You're not gonna wanna blend in 100% with the crowd.
absolutely. I have two daughters myself, and my older daughter had 8 and 10. My daughters are, and my older daughter, who's 10, has really curly hair, and doesn't want curly hair, and goes through the routine with my wife every morning, straightening her hair. And I try to tell her, your hair is so pretty, like just leave it curly once. So,
Yeah.
what a great lesson you learned. I mean, no matter what you do in life, what a great lesson to be yourself and emphasize your own strengths.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think it's a lesson that I am continuing to learn every day, right? I mean, it's and like you said, Megan,
Yeah, we all are. Yeah, right.
yeah, exact. I mean, it's a journey. And so I think at different points in your life, it's appropriate, especially when you're younger, to experiment and to see, how what you're putting out into the world affects people and what's coming back to you and
Mhm.
sort of to have that mirroring as you're learning, okay, this is how I want to conduct myself. This is how I get the best results and this is what's comfortable for me.
Yeah.
So I think it takes a lifetime, right?
Right. Like, we're always kind of evolving and changing, and, like, we should be, right?
Right,
Right.
exactly. When I stop doing that is when I will die, right? I mean, it's just,
Yeah,
I don't want to stop evolving in that way.
Yeah.
that's interesting. And then on the marathons, then, I imagine a lot of I've never run a marathon. I'm not really much of a runner. Probably the 5K would be about, good for me. Um, but I imagine that when you're preparing for it, you've really got to break it down into smaller things, smaller achievements, right? To build up to, what is it, 27 miles, right? Is a full marathon.
26.2.
26.2, right? Yeah, I'll round up for you. Call it 27. But so it's like a lot of things in life. Don't look at, getting all the way through law school. Just take the first step, right? Take the LSAT, study for the LSAT, that sort of thing. Did you see that kind of help you in life in that regard as well?
Definitely. I think I am incredibly goal oriented, and I've found that part of who I am is when I see the end of a goal is when I start formulating a new one, and which is good and bad, right?
Wow. Yeah.
But I think but you're 100% right with the marathon. It was after I had my son that I was walking throughout my pregnancy. And after I had him, I thought, I feel like walking isn't quite cutting it. I think, I'll try to run. And I was encouraged by a few coworkers and started running. So I really actually next month will be my 8-year running anniversary. And so I couldn't fathom running a marathon at that time, but I'd had a goal of running. There was a 10K in Holyoke, Massachusetts. That's very hilly. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought if I can work myself up to the point that I can run that, I will have achieved this running goal. And then it was sort of in the course of working toward that I thought, okay, I think I can do a half marathon, but I'll never do a marathon. And then as I work toward that, I'm like, okay, now I'm ready. So I think you're right. It's
Yeah.
sort of you take it, one piece at a time and
Yeah,
surprise
interesting.
yourself along the way by continually setting the bar a little higher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and not always having the full plan, like letting the plan evolve too. So maybe, like you said, you didn't start off with a full marathon as your plan, but it continually steps up. So next is an Ironman, right?
That I don't see the path to that. I have thought about yeah, I have thought about doing a triathlon, and swimming is the weak spot for
Yeah,
me.
Mm-hmm.
Um so I
I've
don't I
heard
don't
that's
know.
that's a tough part for everybody, that's
Yeah, I
what
think I would
punches
need some
people.
training. I mean, I can swim, but I can't swim for fitness. It's like 10
Yeah.
minutes. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I pooped, so
Absolutely.
Right,
And
right.
I always joked too that I'm like, oh, swimming is also my weak point, but also I don't have much of a desire to swim in like lakes and that or rivers, and that's typically where you do swim for triathlons, and that is an automatic turn off for me. I always joke, I'm like, I need a country club triathlon where the swimming part is in a nice pristine pool.
yes.
So there's a lot of people, Megan, is this you? A lot of people have a phobia of swimming where they can't see the bottom.
Yeah, I don't
Like,
like
I
it.
think that's a pretty common fear, like wanting to see what's beneath you. Is that
100%.
what's kind of bother? Yeah, okay.
And also just like, I mean, around here, like the Philadelphia Triathlon is like you swim in the Schuylkill River. Pass. No, thank you. Like I like I don't want to ever go in there. Like that I don't know what else is in there. It's probably trash and grossness. Like no, thank you. They say it's
Yeah,
safe, but no.
nobody swims in the Chicago River. I'm looking out my window now. Nobody swims down
Oh, and
there.
it's going to turn green this weekend, right?
It is, yeah, yeah.
That's
Saturday,
right.
2 days. Yeah.
Um. So okay. So let's get back to the real topic at hand. So so you go to law school, you graduate, and you go into private practice at first. And what while you were going through law school, did you have an idea of kind of where you wanted to practice? I mean, you said you were a paralegal and you're reading the deposition, so I imagine you had this idea in your mind that you wanted to go into some sort of litigation. Was that in fact the case?
It was. I think looking back now, I think I had more of an idea of what I did not want to do than really what I did want to do. I feel like a lot of my law school classmates couldn't wait to hang a shingle and have their own firm, and I thought I do not want to do that. I really enjoy practicing law. I really enjoy being in, doing the litigation, but I don't want to do payroll. I don't want to do, the practice management side of it. Um, and I had been working for about, you know, at least 8+ years at that point as a paralegal in plaintiff's personal injury law. And I was afraid at that time that I would be sort of pigeonholed into that area of law by virtue of what I had experience in.
Mhm.
And I didn't really want to do that. Um, but I really did enjoy the litigation side. So I wasn't really sure necessarily what type of law would draw me in and keep me interested for many years to come. But I really enjoy sort of the procedural aspects of litigation practice, and reading and analyzing and sort of thinking through how things apply here and how they could then be apply over here. So I like that mental exercise of it all, but I wasn't really sure where I would end up at that point.
So
Interesting.
where'd you end up?
Well, so after law school, I wound up going first to a small firm in Connecticut where it was a general practice firm. So I did some, uh, commercial litigation and some. It was a lot of debt collection practice, which I did not enjoy. Um, with a little bit of personal injury, but not too much. And then I wound up returning to the firm where I had paralegaled once there was a spot open, and did personal injury for a while, um, which again I didn't love. um, and then was pregnant and having my son, and I realized that having him alone and the way that practice was at that time in Connecticut, it just wasn't going to work to be a
Mhm.
solo parent and have to sort of drive an hour and a half before daycares are even open to get to a
Mhm.
court in the upper northwest corner of Connecticut. So
Right.
so that's really what brought me to insurance. I took a job as a working on attorney billing for an insurance company first, which was sort of a temporary position during my pregnancy. Worked very well for what I had to do at that time, and then and I also sort of learned more. I really hadn't been exposed to the claims side in insurance. I'd handled claims from the attorney side, but not from the defense side, and not in the context of insurance. And so once I sort of had that exposure, I made it my goal. After I came back from maternity leave, I said, okay, I'm going to give myself 6 months and try to get into a claims position at this company. And if it doesn't happen, then I'll look elsewhere. But that was kind of the goal. And I think I signed the offer like 2 days before that 6 month deadline. So, um, and then I went into, and that was a position doing employment practices liability claims, which I had never done before. So it was, brand new area of the law, and, working nationwide. So travel, which was something that really attracted me. And so that kind of is how I wound up in insurance.
So how did you manage though that with the travel and being, a single parent? That must have been difficult for you to juggle as well.
It was a challenge, but it was awesome. It was wonderful. I took my son with me.
That's
all
great.
over the country to do mediations. And
I love it.
Wow.
it was, yeah, it took a lot of logistical organization. And there was, there's a variety of ways that I solved the childcare issue. Um, for example, in Los Angeles, I hired a nanny for the day. This was pre-COVID, so at that time, a lot of the corporate daycares would have the opportunity to have guest daycare spots. So I would sign him up for a guest daycare spot. I remember doing that in Houston and in Jersey City. Um, and so or I would take my sister traveled with us to San Francisco. And I've continued to do that as much as I can. He's now 8, so it's a little bit of a different game now because
Yeah.
he's now in public school. But
Mhm.
it was just so it was challenging, but it was some of the best memories. And to grow his world in that way, is just been the best blessing.
Yeah. And it probably made him
Yeah.
so resilient though too. Like he had to adapt to new locations, new people, like being, a guest kid in a daycare isn't always the easiest, but also kids can just roll on into those things too. That we overthink it probably more than they
Mhm.
do. But
Oh, yeah.
have you seen that translate now into like how he approaches like new situations? Like, does he just kind of roll with it more so than like probably the average kid? I imagine he does.
Yes, I think he does. And I mean, to be fair, he's my only child, so I don't really have much to compare. But he was always just a wonderful travel partner. I mean, he's still my favorite travel partner.
Oh,
And he's very he loves people. He's very social. So, and he's very good at picking up on people's emotions. And so he would, when he was very young, if he saw someone sad, he'd ask, or he'd give them a hug, or he
Oh,
would,
that's nice.
he would, be a star in the guest daycare. Like they wouldn't want him to leave. So he makes friends very easily. He's very good with language. So he's always been able to, I mean, it was a little bit more nerve-wracking when he was too young to communicate his needs. So it got a lot more comfortable once he was able to speak and really tell me, because of course a part of me was always like, dropping him off somewhere I've never been, he's never
yeah.
been. But a lot of those corporate daycares had pretty standardized throughout the country, so you kind of know what to expect. You know what the schedule is going to be like. And so it made it easier, I think, than it would have otherwise been. um, and the nanny was wonderful, but she had a
Yeah.
deadline. And so she ended up dropping him off with me, and I actually finished a mediation in Los Angeles with him in the front carrier. So it was great.
I don't want to speak
But
for you,
like
Lenore, but so I have a 10-year-old and 8-year-old, and what I find is we're so busy with sports right now and stuff, balancing that and getting to all their practices. It gives you so much perspective. So when you're working and you're a professional and you're going to work and you have those stresses, when you then go and you get to be with your child and doing something else, it gives you that almost a moment to exhale, put things back into perspective, what's really important in your life. I wonder if you found that as you were progressing in your career while balancing taking care of your son as well.
Absolutely. I think being a parent provides a purpose to your life that didn't exist before you were a parent, right? So it's he is my why. He's why
Mhm.
I do everything, why I want to be a better person tomorrow than I am today. Um, and you're right. And I think, I mean, he's also, because he's sort of naturally spreads joy, he has been a real asset in, for example, with that mediation. Of course, I asked everyone before he came in if it was okay. And I don't know that I would have been able to settle that case without, because you're right. It's not just me. It gives everyone a perspective of kind of, okay, like you know, we're thinking about this case, but then we're looking at this
Yeah.
child. And, when we view children, it just brings us back to a different perspective and can be really helpful in, kind of figuring out what's important and what's not.
Mhm.
Right.
Right, right. And as a person, I mean, you work obviously with an insurance company. Um, I represent insurance companies as a coverage attorney, and it humanizes you with
Mhm.
other people sometimes when you talk about your kids. It can help with when you're dealing with an insured or something like that. Of, hey, I'm a person just like you. There's things in my life that are important too. I can't tell you how many times you don't use it to your advantage or anything like that, but it is a way to make people comfortable with you, and let them know that, I have life outside of this too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. And I think, the way that we sort of do use it to our advantage is it increases our ability to empathize with all
Hmm.
sorts of people. And I think I sometimes sort of reflect on the culmination of my experiences in life and how they help me relate to such a wide variety of people. And it really helps you in having some of those really difficult conversations, or getting somebody to trust you, to understand that you understand and are aligned with what's in their best interest. And I think, going back to what we experienced during the pandemic, we the pendulum swung really far in the direction of people kind of really knowing who you are, right?
Mhm.
um, but
Right.
the insurance industry as a whole has this bring your whole person to work mentality, which I've always loved. I think it's so much more inclusive than some of the other environments that I've worked in, and I really appreciate that. And I think now that we've moved out of the pandemic era, we're sort of more open and comfortable with some of the human sides of people that we
Yeah.
probably didn't see as much before. But it's certainly swung a little bit back, to where, I'm no longer have like a child in the background, throwing a ball at my head, which did happen during the pandemic. So
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
you didn't, if he's 8, he's in second grade, right? Is that what you said?
yes.
Okay. So you didn't have to, or maybe you did experience it. Did you have any of the remote school for him where he's on a laptop behind you trying to, have math class or gym class or something, and you're working from home as well?
So he was in daycare at the time. So I had a period of no childcare availability, which is a risk that I did never anticipated would be part of my life, right? And there was some remote options for him at that age, but they were sort of really didn't work for that age, for one thing, but they were also more voluntary. So for the most part, his daycare closed, and I'm in Georgia, so it wasn't closed as long as in some other states. But there was a period where I had to work, and I had a child who needed attention and no daycare option. So
yeah.
I think we're all still experiencing the PTSD, that comes from having lived through that period.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. But then there's just a part of me that misses it too. And I wish part of me could go back and be calmer about the whole experience. I think I didn't embrace it as positively as I probably should have. And now I look back, I'm like, oh, what was I so stressed out about? I should have found more in, but it was very stressful having, like, because my kids were doing the online school and it was crazy. But I wish if I could change it, I wish I could go back and be like, let's just chill out. Like, and this will all turn out okay.
Yeah, I mean there was definitely a lot of lessons I think that we all took away from that period, right? Um,
Mhm.
but at the time when we were in it, we didn't know. There was so much unknown about how long it would last and what it would mean, and there's just that competing, all your competing priorities and wanting to still be productive.
Yeah,
And it was hard,
it
right?
Yeah,
was.
it
It
was
was
very
hard.
hard. And
It
what I'm
was.
thankful for out of that is that I always thought before the pandemic and we were really force fed work from home, I always thought life would be so great if I could just be at home all the time and not ride the train to the city and, not have that part of my day taken up by doing that. Well, after I was force fed that for really, I mean, probably 2 years, I was really almost 100% from home. Boy, I am glad that I'm coming downtown now, and getting out and being in the office and seeing people again and going to lunch with people. And we need that interaction. I really I didn't believe that before. I always thought, no, I could get so much more done. I'd be fine. I, speaking for just myself, love coming to the office now. Appreciate it so much. We put a lot of value in our kids to spending time outside with friends, that sort of thing. So on the bright side of things, we were kind of force fed with the grass isn't always greener, that type of thing. So I'm thankful for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, there's definitely some balance to be struck, right? Because I think
Right.
I agree. When I do go, I'm fully remote, so I'm a little jealous to hear that you're going into the office. Because I love that interaction and just the collegiality. You can have those sort of impromptu conversations where you're like, hey, I'm working on this case and you know, thinking about this, do you have a second? These days it's kind of like, let me put
Yeah.
some time on your calendar, right? but but it's also definitely true that some of our work lends itself more to being at home and being able to really just focus, right, with your
Yeah.
head down. So I think, there's definitely benefits to what has sort of now developed into, I think, primarily a hybrid world that we're in. Um, but I definitely miss going into an office.
I don't.
Yeah.
I you know, I love that I can be home, and I love that when they come home, I'm home from school, and I hope this is a memory that they have, and they were like, they see me as a professional, but they also know that I'm here, but I definitely struggle with I love when they come home and hearing about their day, but then it's from the time that they get home till the end of my day, it's extraordinarily difficult to get anything of substance done. Do you have that same problem? And if you don't, I want to know your solution because because I really struggle with it from 3:45 to 5:30. It is like I just need to do low-hanging fruit more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're right. I definitely try my best to set up my day to, sort of front load the things that require more brain power on the earlier side of the day, because also that's just better for me. I'm a morning person. Um, but what really helped me was, when I first took a remote position, I didn't have a separate room to work in. I set up my office in my living room, and that was really difficult.
Mhm.
I did it, I got through it, but then a couple of years later, I bought a house, and now I have a dedicated space, with a door that I can close. um, so that I'm in my office working. So even when he comes home from school, he's very happy to jump on his iPad. And so usually the next couple of hours after he gets home, that's kind of when I finish up my work day. Um, he can get his own snack for the most part. Um, and I can usually, take, one or two meetings in the afternoon and still get them done because but it's a phase, right? I mean, there's
Mhm.
times when they need us more, and then there's a year ago, it would have been a different conversation. I would have
Right.
been like, nope, I don't
Right.
schedule
Right.
anything after 3.
Yeah. Um, well, in any event, let's pivot to like the like this always happens too, is we get on a subject and it's very interesting and we get a little sidetracked, but but
Talk about the things you like to talk about, right?
Right, right.
but
Right.
let's talk about what you're doing now. Because you got into claims and then you've pivoted over to Hartford Steam Boiler and you're doing well, tell us what is you're doing now. What sort of claims are you seeing? And what's coming across your desk?
Yeah, so I during COVID, I was promoted to a manager, so I now manage a team of adjusters. So I'm no longer handling the claims on a day to day. I'm supervising them, um, which is great. But it's also an adjustment because I really loved the claims handling. So now I'm sort of taking a step back and looking at them from a different level, which is nice because I have sort of better perspective, trends wise, and what we're seeing. But I do sometimes miss some of the day-to-day handling stuff too.
Mhm.
And so I work in the specialty claims. So we handle, it's really primarily employment practices liability. Um, we also handle some other types of claims like construction, errors and omissions, and miscellaneous professional liability and cyber liability, and that kind of thing. But it's still the bulk of what I've handled over the past almost decade now is the employment practices liability.
On the EPL side, I wonder, and this kind of brings back in what we were just talking about with the pandemic. Um, I've heard from some people seeing some EPL side claims relating to kind of post-pandemic thing. People not going or seemingly not wanting to come back into the office. I know there's disability issues that arise, that sort of thing. Are you seeing those type of claims now?
So we are. I think during the pandemic, I think that there was a lot of eyes on what would happen in the EPL world and how COVID would impact the claims that we see. And and we keep an eye on the statistics that are released by the EEOC every year, and sort of just nationwide what's happening trend wise. And I feel like what I have seen is not so much a difference in the types of claims, but just the facts changing, to sort of weave in. So if someone was going to complain about a disability in the office, they're now complaining about the disability at home. Or,
Oh,
so it doesn't seem, and I was sort of surprised at some of the, you, you, you would sort of think that remote work would lend itself to, well, I guess it cuts both ways, but I feel like some of the discrimination factors that people experience in face to face, you would think it would be lessened somewhat in the remote world, but it doesn't seem to be. So which is interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
you would kind of assume that relationships have a better chance of going sour when you're in person every
Yeah.
day. um Turns out I guess that's not the case. But
And do you find that it's over like on the interactions that are going sour? Is it on the video conference or is it on email or like how are you seeing those exchanges or those issues arise?
well, I guess it varies. I mean, I think a lot of the claims that we see are workers that are in person. So those things maybe haven't changed as much. I have seen some claims related to disability where, where the claim is sort of founded on, I'm fine working from home, but
Yeah.
going into the office would be the hardship.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Um, and then you sort of have to get into the analysis of what is the job, and is it something that can be done from home reasonably versus, is there a reason, you know, that they need to be in the office. So I guess I've sort of seen both um, ways, but maybe that is the lack of difference, is that a lot of these people are still in the office or out
Yeah.
in the field doing various jobs that are not remote work. Um,
Are they trying to, are some of the claims, are claimants trying to make the case that work from home is the accommodation for my disability? That's the accommodation that I need.
I have seen that, um,
Right.
and that can be, I think sort of complicated if that was how the employment relationship began, right?
Exactly. Right.
Because if, you would think about the arguments on both sides, but you think, well, if you've been successful, if this accommodation was only made by virtue of circumstance, right?
Mhm.
And now we're no longer in that circumstance, and the, you know, foundational requirement is being in the office, it's a tough argument, right? Um,
Mhm.
so I have seen some of those claims.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, we're seeing that too. Just in the workforce generally, there's a hesitation to getting back into the office, at least full time. It's pretty common now, at least in Chicago where I am, that people are in the office 3 days. That seems to be kind of a norm now. And the schedule is usually Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so people work from home Mondays and Fridays. Judging by the train, today, a Thursday, much busier than it will be tomorrow. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it ebbs and flows, and certainly there's a difference between the person who was already at the employer prior to COVID and then did work from home, and now it's somehow an accommodation versus the scenario of someone who just joined the force during uh, during
Yeah.
COVID or post 2020.
Right. And I think we've seen a lot of articles over the past couple of years that sort of tout the benefits of the in-person work, and how we are more collaborative in person, or what, there's tasks that are better in person, and then there's tasks that are appropriate at home, right? So I think
Absolutely.
hence sort of the current 3-day hybrid model. I think that's true of what I've observed in the area that I live in as well. A lot of the market in Atlanta, it's the same type of jobs that are available, is,
Mhm.
3 days in office and 2 days, and same where it's Monday, Friday home.
Mhm. Right,
So,
right.
but we're now, I mean, it was 2020, so we're now 4 years
Right.
in, right? So I don't know what it will look like in 5 years. I don't know if there will ever be sort of a full return to the office where that's the default. I sort of doubt it. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of doubt it as well, but there are definitely companies that that's what they do. I just think most people are looking for a little bit more flexibility, and not to say that everyone wants to be remote all the time, but I think people realize like, hey, life can function a little bit easier when you have a day or two that you are working from home, that you like can kind of get some other things done, not necessarily you're taking time away from your day, but like I don't know, throwing a load of laundry in on on a Monday, like it can help, it can just help life function a little bit, and it makes things a little bit easier. So I do think um people look for that.
Yeah, and to what we talked about with kids. I mean,
Yeah.
having that flexibility with kids, because you never know when, I mean, they wake up and they're sick that day, but I can still access all of my files and I can still work. I know for myself, and I'm sure you both are the same way too. When it was work from home, it wasn't that I was being distracted and doing more personal things than business things. It was the exact opposite. I couldn't ever,
Turn it off.
stop working. Right. I made the mistake of bringing my laptop over to my lap while I'm sitting in front of the TV, or, it just never ends. So we, at least in my house, had to separate things.
Yeah.
Like Lenore said, I'm glad to have that door that I can close. Like, that's my office. That's where I work. When I'm out here, I'm dad and, talking about basketball practice or soccer practice.
Yeah. So
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think also that, because I'm sort of a social scientist too, right? And I fancy myself one. And I think there's also personalities that lend themselves well to being productive. In that, like you said, Megan, with the load of laundry, like I too am a proponent of full work life integration, where it's, you have this much you need to get done today. And I love having that flexibility of being able to set up my
Yeah.
day in the way that serves my entire life best. Um, and of course, there's guardrails with, meetings that you have to attend, or, clients that you need to meet at particular times, especially with different time zones and everything. But even within those guardrails, I feel like I can be the most productive employee with this flexibility. I don't
mhm.
think that's true with everyone. I think, some people need to be in the office in order to be more productive, and are more prone to distractions or things that will, cause a decline in productivity. um, so I think, there's a lot of factors at play as to whether or not it'll be successful for any particular
Yeah.
person or any particular job, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like it works for you. What we've heard about you today, I would say probably a very disciplined self-starter. And so
Right.
that for work from home, you can probably do that better than the time that you would waste on a commute or something like that. So yeah, I 100% agree that it's personality and how
Yeah.
you integrate it into your life.
Yeah, I very much like to take myself out of the distractions in an office. I tend to talk to everybody and not get anything done.
And that makes sense too.
I need to eliminate the distractions. Because yeah, even pre-pandemic, I was working from home like 3 or 4 days a week, and I used my office day. It was like my social day. It's like I made my lunch dates. I had to see all my people. I actually got very little productive like work done those days because it was like, all right, I get to be out in the open today with all the other people.
Right, it's break time. It's
Yeah, and
recess,
that's exactly when I go up to our home office, that's how I feel too. It's like a reunion or a party, you get to see, I
Yeah.
mean, it's the relationship building time, but knowing that you can prepare for it, right? Where you're like, okay, I'm
Mm.
going to do like 2 hours of work in the hotel before I go into the office,
Yeah.
because I know that, the next few hours are going to be really about socializing. So,
Yes.
I think as long as you are realistic about what you can get done where, you can really set yourself up to be very productive.
Right.
Um, so, but one thing you and I had talked about on the phone when we spoke a few weeks ago is some of your pressure points and pain points with EPL claims. And one of the topics you had brought up with me though is really trying to connect with the importance of trying to connect with the claimant and building some trust with them. um and I just I wanted to touch on that before we run out of time, because I just remember when you and I talked, you're like, building trust with the claimant was so important to you. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that because it really stuck out to me.
Yeah, and I think I was talking about the insured, right? Building
Yes.
trust with the insured.
Mm.
Yes. So I think, and Nick was sort of touching on it before about, embracing the human that you are and sort of leveraging that to formulate a relationship. And I think, EPL claims are different than other areas of the law in which I've worked in that they're so emotional. They're oftentimes, it feels like an attack for somebody to have an employee claim something about them that's bad, right? That they did something wrong. And a lot of times they're so defensive in that first conversation.
Mhm.
They don't want you to think of them as a bad person by virtue of these allegations, and they really want to spend some time telling you about how they did nothing wrong. And so, I think the list, and at that point oftentimes there's a, you know they're not even open to having a conversation about resolution at that point, because it's just so unfathomable to pay someone money, um, for something when you did nothing wrong, right?
Mhm.
um, so I think, you know and then eventually I'm going to want this person to take my advice, right? And I'm sure
Yeah.
you guys deal with the same thing. And so in order to build that relationship, I think listening is really the first, part of the conversation there. You need to take the time and give someone the space to tell you their side of the story without judgment, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, right? Depending
Right.
on who the person is. Um, but it's a courtesy and a grace that we owe, right? And I think at that point, recognizing that today may not be the day that you're saying, hey, listen, I think it makes economic sense or it makes business sense to, you know, consider resolving this for this many dollars. That's not the conversation to have at that point. That's the conversation that you're going to have, maybe in 3 months, maybe a month, maybe 6 months, once things are sort of simmered down. Like I feel like the EPL claims often have sort of a waiting period of emotional distance that needs to occur before
Yeah.
people can really have a productive conversation about resolution. And so, I think it's important for people to know that you're on their side, in the sense
Mhm.
that you are trying to get them to a resolution that is in their best interest, regardless of what that may be. That you're willing to fight if that's what makes sense, or what is insisted upon. Um, but then sort of slowly but surely having those conversations to the point that, then your advice, they know, okay, well, I can go to Nick or I can go to Megan and ask, because I know that they respect me and they care about me, and they're going to give me good advice. So
Yeah. That's such a good approach, Lenore. A big part of my practice is cyber. I do a lot of cyber work, and on the first party claims, I've been the point of first contact before with insureds,
Yeah.
and understanding what they are going through, and that this is, at least in their business world, it's the worst day they've ever had. Their business is in jeopardy right now. So to come in and kind of present myself, yes, I represent your insurance carrier, but my job is to make sure you get everything you're entitled to under the policy and take them through the steps, take them through the different coverages, make sure that we have our breach response people out there right away to help them get back up and running, get their data back. Yes, it avoids a business interruption loss on our end, which, my clients care about. But it instills confidence in them. So, like you said, they can come back later and they understand you're on their side. You're doing things that are in their best interest, because their best interest is pretty much aligned with my client's best interest, with the carrier. The tough conversation too. It's not necessarily someone that they've worked with for a long time, and they're like, how can they make these accusations, and why would I pay them anything, for this to resolve it? In our world, it's when we have to talk about paying a ransom. That's oftentimes a really hard conversation to have. It's like giving an award. to someone for putting out a fire when that's the person that started the fire, right?
Yeah.
So I think in our world, in the insurance world, and with attorneys in general as well, I've talked about before, having bedside manner. We don't learn that in law school. We learn X's and O's and how does this fit together, and code courses and procedure and that sort of thing. But learning the human aspect of it, and maybe that's really just on the job training where you get that, or other life experiences like you've talked about. But having that bedside manner and understanding it's not just what you say, but how you
Yeah.
say it, the timing of it. There's a lot of variables.
Well, and one thing though that I wanted to jump off on that too, that with the building the trust though, I think that bed going with Nick said too, with the bedside manner and working with your insureds, I'm here to help you. But then sometimes once they're able to, they trust you, be like, I'm here to help you, but I also I've identified maybe what could be an issue, and it might be something you want to modify later to mitigate potential future claims. And at that point too, they trust you because you're like, look, I've helped you and I've been honest with you about all these other things, but I've also identified something that might be problematic, and they're probably more willing to take what you say to heart and listen to you, because they're like, okay, well, they Nor had had my back here, so she's probably right here.
Right, exactly. And I think, Nick, your discussion about the first party response, it's dealing with people in crisis, right? And I think and I know I've had more than one conversation with insureds about using me, leveraging my objectivity, in letting them know, like, you're in the trenches, you're very emotionally invested, and of course, the way that you characterize and have that conversation differs depending on who your audience is. But to be able to say, part of my job is to be out here, be objective, and be able to give you, the advice to work through this, and sort of having that calm and that reassurance, and that, hey, I know this is the first time in 30 years you've dealt with this. I deal with this day in and day out, so I can help you. I know what to do here. And it's it really can go a long way.
Yeah, and I find myself talking with insureds a lot about, let's make a business decision here, right? And just making a distinction between, I understand this is wrong. I can't tell you these are not criminals who have encrypted your data, who are threatening to put it on the dark web. But we have to make a business decision. What's best for you, just to get you back up and running. So if we have to deal with them, we have to deal with them. And on EPL side, I'm sure we have to make, even though what they're saying, I understand you believe it's all false. We've got to figure out what the least painful way of getting out of this situation is.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I think, just generally from a problem solving standpoint, I like to try to get to a point where you can have the conversation about the outcome that you're seeking, and
Yeah.
then sort of back up and hatch out the plan to get there.
Yeah.
And so, and that, again, may not be the first conversation, um but we have some overlap there, Nick, where it's saying, hey, we don't want you to have to be spending your time, going into
Correct.
court, having depositions done, producing records. We want you to be running your business, and that's what we're here to help you do.
That's right.
We talk about it all the time here. Like the client defines what win means. Win doesn't necessarily mean winning a trial. It could be. That could be what that client wants, and that could be a win for them. But most of the times the win is, what is the best decision for this particular situation, and a business, it could involve a business decision, and you have to define what the client wants that win, or define what win is for them. And it's exactly what you said there.
Yeah, and I think it's important to ask, right, Megan? Because I
Mhm.
think sometimes we forget that, you
Yeah.
know, when we do this day in and day out, we sort of have this presumption of what a win is. And when I did personal injury law, the only thing that I could really get for someone was money, right? But sometimes that wasn't what they wanted. Sometimes they wanted an apology or
Yeah.
they wanted
Yeah.
something else. And so, I learned over time to be more creative and more collaborative with the client to find out, what is it that, what would be most meaningful to you in solving this problem, and then working in that direction, or at least listening, even if it's something that I can't get as a win, at
Yeah.
least knowing what a win looks like so that we can then sort of recharacterize what it could be.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
To,
Um,
and I was wondering too, what's big in the cyber industry as well is managed detection and response, is preventative measures ahead of time. Some of the best carriers I work with offer a lot of services at the front end before there ever is a claim to figure out, hey, where are your weak spots? Where could we use some training internally, that sort of thing. Making employees aware of different tactics of threat actors, that sort of thing. At Hartford Steam, do you also have something that is ahead of time that's kind of a preventative measure to see what your employers are doing and where there could be some exposure?
Yeah. So I think that is absolutely the wave of the future of the
mhm.
industry, right? Is a lot of concentration on that, and
Hmm.
we are involved in that as well. So yes, I think and it's tough, right? Because I think the threat actors are, always a few steps ahead, right? So
Mhm.
I think what is today's detection and scans and all of the things that we are focused on doing in order to put someone in the best
Right.
you know position in the event of a attack, hopefully to prevent one altogether, but at least if we're not able to do that, to mitigate the
Yeah.
damage and the effects. um it's an ever evolving target, right? So yes, we're very much involved in that aspect of,
Yeah.
early detection, scanning, that kind of thing.
And I would imagine on the EPL side as well, looking at the policies or even offering maybe training programs to your insureds.
Yeah, there is some, and I feel like a lot of times there's opportunities for defense counsel, outside of handling the claim, but also for taking a look at, what the employee manual is, and, what are the policies and
Right.
procedures, like, because sometimes, depending on the size of the business and the type of advising they had when they were setting up the business, they could fall anywhere on the spectrum, from having, no written policies at all, to having their own legal department. So
Yeah.
I think meeting them where they are and trying to identify potential gaps or areas for improvement. Um, yeah, we definitely keep an eye out for that as well.
Well, I I f- we are like overtime at this point, and I I there's so much more I feel like we to discuss here. Unfortunately, we talked about all these other things first that were equally as interesting. Um, so I'm gonna throw this out here. I think Lenore, I think you might need to come on another time so we can really dig into a lot of these other issues, because
Yeah, so do
I
you
don't even
do
think I got to
cyber
point
stuff?
two.
I could talk to you forever about cyber.
Yeah. Yes. I handle the
Oh,
the cyber liability side. Um,
oh, I
but
didn't know that. Okay.
but yeah, I would love to come on again, Megan.
That'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
I have this outline here, and I'm like, we're on like point two of like a bunch. Um, but I wanna before we close up, I wanna ask you this, because you had a bob and weave and winding path, and I love your story, and I think it's super interesting. And you learned a lot over that time. So, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now and all like the differing paths and the path that you took?
So, I pondered this a little bit because I think in your outline there was a question about regrets or something to that nature of like what would I have done differently,
Hmm.
and I think nothing. I would I would not have done anything differently, but I say that as a conscious choice. There things that I regret or that I feel shame about decision making or anxieties that I hold on to from the past, 40 some odd years. Absolutely. Like, some of those things keep me up at night at times.
Hmm.
But I really choose to embrace where I am by virtue of all of those missteps as well as those steps. I
Yeah.
think I wouldn't be here talking to you today in this role, pursuing my postdoctoral masters at UConn right now, working on my LLM, um,
Nice.
as a
Yeah.
solo mom in Georgia if it wasn't for all of those things that happened. So it's I think what I've learned and what I would reassure myself is to sort of hang on. Like there are times when you don't see the path forward, and that's okay. I think, there have been times in my life when I didn't know, how I was going to pay for my next meal or where I was going to be tomorrow. Like there have been times where I have been have really struggled, and th- I love that. I wouldn't have
Hmm.
had it any other way because I think it's, sort of turned me into who I continue to evolve into.
Hmm.
And it's taken me a while. Like you said, you like my story. I didn't like my story for a long time. And
Yeah.
it's, some of the leaders in at HSB, we have sort of a leaders podcast where some of the leaders will share their story. And it was sort of listening to some of those and recognizing that I'm not alone in having a long and winding path, that I've only sort of recently come to own my path and be proud of it for what it is because it's mine. It's all
Yeah.
I have. So I think I think I would just tell myself to keep the faith and that, things will get better, they'll get worse, but they'll keep moving forward.
Yeah. I I will say from experience with this podcast,
That reminds me of,
I I always ask the question about the path because everyone has a different path, and I will say that typically I don't think I have yet to have anyone who's had a straight path. Everyone has had the long windy path, and that's why I ask it because I find it fascinating to hear where people started, what they intended to do, and what they're doing now, and it and so you're certainly not alone, and that's like you should absolutely celebrate it. And yes, it definitely was not easy, although, and there's going to be not easy parts ahead, but now from experiencing the difficult things in the past, you're going to get through whatever you're faced with in the future.
so the
Yeah.
mantra that this is kind of reminding me of, and that I 100% believe at this point, is that life happens for you, not to you.
Hmm.
And I think that's exactly what you are all saying. Having all the background that you have, even if it's a misstep, well, now you know it's a misstep. You have that
Yeah.
experience now. Having that diversity in your background only makes you stronger, only makes it, define you even more. So, yeah, life happens for you, not to you.
Yeah, and I thank you, Megan, for bringing these stories on your podcast because I think part of what strengthens us is having that transparency and understanding that, because I think there's sort of a, misperception that, people around you have just had this easy path and anytime you start to get curious about someone, you learn that it's never what it seems, and I love
Mhm.
that about getting to know people, is, and I say that to my son a lot of, sort of that, you'll see those on Instagram and stuff, those memes about like, you never know what somebody is struggling with that day.
Yep.
So be kind.
Yes.
And that's, and that's just how I try to conduct myself. Like, be a good human is really the baseline of what it all comes down to, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Lenore,
So-
thank you so much for sitting down with us today. And I look forward to round 2. We can get that,
thank
get
you.
that on the books. And of course, for everyone listening, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to The Claims Never Sleep. You can find us on your favorite streaming platform as well as on YouTube at Claims Never Sleep Podcast. Thank you for tuning in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell